The Galactic Fleet arrived at Earth too late. Humanity had already left for war. Far beyond the edge of known space, in a region the star charts simply called the Grey Reach, a massive fleet moved through the dark. Hundreds of ships flew together in a slow, careful formation, their hulls catching the weak light of distant stars. This was the Concorde Fleet, the combined navy of many alien races who had joined together long ago to protect the smaller worlds of the galaxy from danger. At the front of this fleet, on the bridge of the flagship called the Silver Accord, stood Fleet Marshal Vetal Sen. Vetal was not human. She belonged to a species called the Ilvanar, tall beings with pale blue skin, long limbs, and calm golden eyes that rarely showed strong emotion. The Ilvanar had led the Concorde for 300 years, guiding younger and weaker species away from harm. They were proud of this role. They believed it was their duty to watch over the galaxy, like careful parents watching over children who did not yet understand how dangerous the universe could be. For the past 2 years, the Concorde had been watching a small, blue-green planet at the edge of a quiet star system. The planet was called Earth, and its people called themselves humans. The Concorde had found Earth almost by accident, when one of their scout ships picked up strange radio signals coming from the third planet of a yellow star. At first, the scouts thought the signals were natural noise. But as they listened longer, they realized the signals held patterns. Music, voices, numbers. Earth was not empty. Earth was alive with people. The Concorde had rules about first contact. They never rushed. They watched a new species for years before deciding whether to reveal themselves. They studied how the species treated each other, how they used their technology, and whether they were ready to know that they were not alone in the universe. Humans, from what the Concorde could see, were young and rough. They still fought wars among themselves. They still argued over borders and resources. But they were also curious, brave, and quick to learn. In just 100 years, they had gone from simple flying machines to reaching their own moon. The Concorde found this fascinating. Some species took 1,000 years to make progress that humans made in a single lifetime. Vetal had personally overseen the study of Earth. She had watched recordings of human cities, human wars, human art, and human laughter. She did not fully understand why, but she had grown fond of these small, strange creatures. They seemed so fragile compared to the great empires of the galaxy, and yet they never seemed to give up on anything. When Vetal reported to the Concorde Council, she often defended humans, saying they deserved protection and guidance, not fear or dismissal. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. A Concorde listening post near the edge of the galaxy picked up a signal that made every commander's blood run cold. It was the signature of a Skarn warfleet, moving through hyperspace on a course that pointed directly at the human system. The Skarn were an ancient and terrible enemy, a race of conquerors who had destroyed dozens of young civilizations over the centuries. They did not come to talk. They did not come to trade. They came to take. Any world they found with intelligent life, they either enslaved or wiped clean. The Concorde had fought the Skarn many times before, and every time, the cost had been terrible. When the Council learned that a Skarn fleet was heading toward Earth, there was panic. Many species on the Council did not care about humans. To them, Earth was just one more primitive world, not worth the risk of Concorde lives. But Vetal stood before the Council and argued with everything she had. "They do not know what is coming," she said. "They do not even know we exist. If we do nothing, the Skarn will erase them before they ever have the chance to grow. We have watched them for 2 years. We know their spirit. They deserve a warning, at the very least. And if it is within our power, they deserve our shields between them and the enemy." After a long debate, the Council agreed to send a fleet, not their full strength, because the Concorde had other borders to protect, but a strong task force, enough ships to face a Skarn raiding fleet and win. Vetal was given command. She accepted without hesitation. The trip to Earth's system was not short. Even with the Concorde's fastest hyperspace engines, it took many weeks to cross the distance. Vetal spent much of that time in her private quarters, studying human history one more time, trying to guess how they would react to first contact under such frightening circumstances. She hoped, more than anything, that the Concorde fleet would arrive before the Skarn did. She hoped there would be time to warn Earth properly, to explain who the Concorde were, to offer real help before panic could take hold. On the bridge of the Silver Accord, her second in command, A broad-shouldered Tavreni engineer named Dorskam worked closely with her. Dorsk was gruff but loyal, a soldier who had fought the Skarn before and carried the scars to prove it. He did not share Vetal's soft feelings toward the humans, but he respected her judgment, and he hated the Skarn more than he doubted her. "Marshal," Dorsk said one day, standing over a glowing star map, "our scouts report the Skarn fleet has slowed. They seem to be gathering more ships before pushing further into human space. That gives us a small window. If we push our engines to their limit, we could beat them there by perhaps 10 days. Vetal nodded slowly. "Do it. Push the engines. I do not want humanity to face the Skarn alone, even for a single hour." The fleet surged forward, engines burning brighter than safety protocols normally allowed. Every ship in the Concord task force strained to move faster, crews working double shifts to keep systems from overheating. Vetal barely slept during this time. She stood on the bridge for hours, watching the star map, watching the small blue dot that marked Earth, praying to whatever gods her people still remembered that they would not be too late. At last, after weeks of hard travel, the fleet crossed into the outer edge of the human solar system. Sensors lit up with readings from the system's planets, moons, and asteroid belts. Vetal felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear as she watched the reports scroll across the screen. They had made it. They had arrived before the Skarn. Now, all that remained was to make contact with Earth, warn them of the coming danger, and prepare a defense. But something was wrong. The sensor readings did not match what the Concord scouts had recorded over the past 2 years. Earth's orbit should have been busy with satellites, space stations, and the small fleet of exploration ships humans had begun building in the last decade. Instead, the sensors showed almost nothing. A handful of automated satellites drifted quietly. The orbital stations, once bustling with activity according to old reports, now sat dark and silent. "Dorsk," Vetal said, her voice tight. "Run the scan again. There must be an error." Dorsk ran the scan 3 times. Each time the results came back the same. Earth's orbit was nearly empty. No warships. No colony ships. No sign of the large fleet of vessels the Concord's own scouts had reported seeing under construction just months before. "Marshal," Dorsk said slowly, "I do not think this is an error." Vetal ordered the fleet to slow its approach and move cautiously toward Earth itself. As the ships drew closer, more strange details appeared. The great cities of Earth, once bright with light and full of movement even from orbit, seemed dimmer than before. Not destroyed. There were no signs of battle, no wreckage, no fire. Just quieter, as if a great many people had simply stopped being there. Vetal ordered her communications officer, a small 4-armed Karathi named Bissa, to open a channel to Earth, using the languages the Concord had learned from years of listening to human broadcasts. "This is Fleet Marshal Vetal Sen of the Concord Fleet," she said, speaking slowly and clearly, hoping the translation systems would carry her words correctly. "We come in peace, offering warning and protection. We ask to speak with the leaders of Earth. Please respond." Silence answered her. Long, empty silence. Bissa adjusted her equipment, trying different frequencies, different languages, different protocols. Still nothing came back but faint automated signals, the kind of pre-recorded messages sent by machines rather than people. One such signal, when finally decoded, made Vetal's stomach twist into a cold knot. It was a short message, repeating on a loop, from what seemed to be Earth's largest remaining space station. A calm human voice spoke in a language the translators struggled with at first, then rendered clearly. "This is an automated message from United Earth Defense Command. All civilian and non-essential personnel have been evacuated to underground shelters as a precaution. All primary fleet assets have departed on active deployment. This station is operating under skeleton crew and automated defense protocols. If you are receiving this message and are not authorized Earth personnel, please state your intentions. Any threat to Earth's remaining population will be met with automated planetary defense response." Vetal stared at the message as it repeated again and again. "Active deployment," she whispered. "Dorsk, what does that mean? Where did they go?" Dorsk's expression had grown grim. "Marshal, I believe it means exactly what it says. Their fleet is gone. Departed. Not destroyed here at Earth. Not hiding somewhere in this system. Gone, somewhere else, for some purpose they call active deployment. But how? Vital said. Our reports from just months ago showed them still building their first true warships. Slow, clumsy things by our standards, barely capable of leaving their own system. How could they possibly already have a fleet capable of active deployment beyond their home world? No one on the bridge had an answer. The Concorde fleet held position at the edge of Earth's orbit, scanning, searching, and waiting for a response that did not come. Vital ordered probes sent down toward the planet's surface, careful automated drones designed to gather information without alarming any remaining defenses. The drones sent back strange pictures. Great cities, mostly quiet, with only small numbers of people visible moving through them, many of them wearing what looked like military or emergency service uniforms. Massive factories along the coastlines, still running, machines working without human hands, producing ships, weapons, and supplies at a pace that made Concorde engineers gasp when they saw the readings. They built factories that build themselves, one engineer said in disbelief, staring at the drone footage. Marshal, look at this. These are fully automated shipyards. They are still producing warships, even with almost no people running them. This is not a primitive species building its first fleet. This looks like a civilization that has been preparing for war for a very long time. Vital felt her calm slipping, or slightly, for the first time in many years. Everything the Concorde believed about humanity, everything her careful 2 years of study had taught her, suddenly felt incomplete, as if she had only been shown a small, gentle piece of a much larger and more dangerous picture. Bissa, she said, keep trying to reach anyone on the surface. Someone must still be there who can explain what has happened. Dorsk, gather the senior officers. We need to understand what we are truly facing here, and what humanity has already done before our arrival. As the officers gathered in the flagship's war room, Vital stood at the head of the table, looking at the star map that now showed Earth's empty orbit and the strange, humming factories below. She thought of the 2 years she had spent watching this world, growing fond of its stubborn, clever people. She had come to protect them from a threat they did not yet know existed, but now it seemed as though humanity might already know, and might already be doing something about it, on a scale the Concorde had never imagined possible. We came to warn them of the Scarn, she said quietly, almost to herself, but it seems Earth may no longer need our warning. Dorsk frowned, arms crossed over his broad chest. Then what do we do now, Marshal? Vital looked back at the dark, quiet planet on the screen, so different from the bright, busy world she remembered from the old reports. Somewhere out there, humanity had already left, and she intended to find out exactly where they had gone, and why. We follow them, she said. Whatever humanity has done, wherever they have gone, we will not stand here doing nothing while the Scarn close in on this system. Prepare a boarding team for that station. I want answers, and I want them soon. The bridge crew moved quickly to follow her orders, but a heavy silence hung over the room. For the first time since the mission began, Vital Sen was not entirely sure what her fleet would find next. All she knew was that the peaceful, watchful mission she had planned had already changed into something far stranger and far more urgent than she had ever expected. Outside the ship, Earth turned slowly beneath them, quiet and almost empty, holding its secrets close, while somewhere far beyond the edge of the solar system, humanity's fleet was already moving toward a war the Concorde knew nothing about. The boarding team assembled within the hour. Vital chose to lead it herself, much to Dorsk's disapproval. He argued that a fleet marshal should not risk herself on an unknown station that might still carry automated weapons, but Vital would not be talked out of it. I have studied these people for 2 years, she told him. I have watched their films, listened to their songs, read their history. If anyone can walk into that station and understand what has happened, it should be me. I will not send others into the unknown while I hide safely on this bridge. Dorsk grumbled but obeyed, and insisted on joining her personally, along with a small squad of Concorde Marines. 6 shuttles left the Silver Accord and descended toward the quiet orbital station, its metal hull marked with the faded letters of an organization the drones had already identified as United Earth Defense Command. Up close, the station was larger than it had first appeared, ringed with empty docking clamps where ships had clearly once been attached. Now those clamps hung open and unused, like empty hands reaching into the dark. The shuttles docked without resistance. No alarms sounded, no defense turrets moved to track them. This, more than anything, unsettled Vatal. A station left with such little defense either trusted that no one dangerous would come, or simply did not have the resources left to defend itself properly. Neither answer felt comforting. Inside, the corridors were dim, lit only by low emergency lighting that pulsed a soft blue along the walls. The air still cycled, meaning the station's basic systems were functioning, but the halls were empty of the crowds of technicians and soldiers the old Concorde recordings had shown. Vatal walked slowly, her boots echoing against the metal floor, Dorsk close behind her with a weapon ready but lowered. They found the control room after passing through several long hallways. Unlike the rest of the station, this room was fully lit, its many screens glowing with data feeds, star charts, and status reports written in human characters. Most of the room was empty, but near the center console sat a single figure, an older human man in a dark blue uniform, sitting very still, watching the door as they entered. He did not look surprised. He did not reach for a weapon. He simply looked tired, and perhaps a little sad. "You must be the ones the sensors picked up 3 days ago," the man said, his voice rough but steady. "I wondered when you would finally come down to say hello." Vatal stepped forward slowly, raising her empty hands, in what she hoped human customs would recognize as a peaceful gesture. "I am Fleet Marshal Vatal Sen, of the Concorde Fleet. We mean you no harm. We came to warn Earth of a great danger, but it seems we may already be too late to deliver that warning in the way we intended." The old man gave a tired, humorless laugh. "Danger. Yes. We know about danger, believe me." He gestured toward one of the many screens behind him. "My name is Admiral James Okafor. I am, at the moment, the highest-ranking officer left on this station, which is not saying very much, since most of the fleet and most of the people who would normally be here have already gone." "Gone where?" Vatal asked, unable to hide the urgency in her voice. "Our scans show your primary space forces have departed the system entirely. Where has humanity sent its fleet, Admiral Okafor, and why?" Okafor studied her for a long moment, his eyes moving over her tall, pale form with open curiosity, though there was little fear in his expression. Perhaps, Vatal thought, humans had already grown used to strange and frightening things in recent months. "About 8 months ago," Okafor said slowly, "our deep space listening arrays picked up something we did not expect. Signals, very faint, very far away, but unmistakably artificial. Not from any human source. We traced them as best we could, and found evidence of a massive fleet movement, far beyond our system, heading in a direction that, if it did not change course, would eventually bring it here." Vatal felt her chest tighten. "The Skarn," she said quietly. "You detected the Skarn fleet." Okafor tilted his head. "Is that what you call them? We did not have a name for whoever was coming. We only knew that something enormous was moving through space, in a pattern that looked, to every analyst who studied it, like an invasion force. And we knew, from what little we could piece together about the size and technology involved, that we stood absolutely no chance of stopping it, if it arrived here while our defenses remained as weak as they were. So you built a fleet," Dorsk said, stepping forward, his voice a low rumble. "In 8 months, that should not be possible." Okafor's mouth curled into something between a smile and a grimace. "It should not be possible, and yet here we are. When people believe their entire species is about to be wiped out, Colonel, it is remarkable how quickly they can move. Every nation on this planet stopped fighting each other within a single week of that discovery being confirmed. Every factory, every mine, every scientist, every engineer, every soldier, all turned toward a single purpose. We built ships far faster than our old plans ever imagined, using shortcuts we would never have dared try under normal conditions. We are not proud of everything we did to make that fleet, but we built it." Vatal absorbed this information slowly, trying to reconcile it with everything the Concorde thought they understood about humanity. "And this fleet, this humanity built in mere months, where is it now?" Okafor turned to the console and pulled up a star chart, one that showed not just the solar system, but a wide stretch of space beyond it, marked with a long, curving path leading away from Earth toward the outer dark. "Our scouts continued tracking the enemy fleet, even as we built our own," he said. "We learned its projected course, its speed, its likely target system, where it seemed to be gathering more strength before making its final approach toward us. About 3 weeks ago, our new fleet departed Earth. Not to wait here and defend our homeworld, but to go out and meet the enemy before they could ever reach our system in full force. Our commanders decided that if we waited for them to come to us, we would already have lost. Better, they said, to strike first, on our terms, while we still had the element of surprise. Vatal stared at the star chart in stunned silence. The idea was almost unthinkably bold. A young species, barely capable of interstellar travel, choosing to fly out and attack an ancient and terrible enemy, rather than wait behind their own defenses. It was either the bravest decision she had ever heard of, or the most foolish, and she was not yet certain which. "That is madness," Dorsk muttered, though there was a strange note of respect buried beneath his gruff tone. "Perhaps," Okafor said, "but it was our choice to make. We did not know if help was coming. We did not know anyone like you existed, Fleet Marshal. All we knew was that if we stayed here and waited to die, we would die. So instead, we chose to fight." Vatal looked again at the star chart, at the long path leading away from Earth into the dark unknown, toward wherever humanity's fleet had gone to meet the Skarn. She thought of the calm, tired voice of Admiral Okafor, and of the 2 years she had spent believing humanity needed protecting like children. Perhaps they did still need help, but it was clear now that they were not waiting quietly for anyone to save them. "Admiral," she said finally, "I need to know everything you can tell me about your fleet's course, its strength, and when it departed. My fleet did not come here simply to deliver a warning. We came to fight beside you, if you would have us. It seems now that the fight has already begun without us, and I do not intend to let humanity face this enemy alone, even if you have already chosen to march toward it, without waiting for permission." Okafor studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his tired eyes, perhaps surprise, perhaps something closer to hope. "Then you had better sit down, Fleet Marshal," he said, gesturing to the chair beside him, "because this is going to take some explaining, and I have a feeling we do not have much time to waste." Outside the station's thick windows, Earth continued its slow, quiet turn beneath a sky that, for the first time in its long history, held more than just human eyes watching it. And far beyond that sky, in the black distance between the stars, 2 fleets were already drawing closer to a battle that would decide far more than anyone yet understood. Admiral Okafor spent the next several hours walking Fleet Marshal Vatal Sen through everything humanity had learned and done since first detecting the Skarn fleet 8 months earlier. Dorsk stood nearby, arms crossed, listening closely, while Concord technicians quietly connected their equipment to Earth systems, carefully copying star charts, fleet records, and message logs with Okafor's permission. "We call them the Wanderers," Okafor said, pulling up more data on his screen. "We did not know your name for them. Our scientists gave them that name, because the first signals we caught seemed to come from a fleet that was already moving, already searching, long before it ever noticed us. It felt fitting." "We call them the Skarn," Vatal said quietly. "They are not wanderers by nature, Admiral. They are conquerors. They have destroyed at least 11 young civilizations that the Concord knows of, and there may be many more that we never learned about in time. They do not wander without purpose. They search for worlds like yours, worlds full of life and resources, and worlds too weak to resist them." Okafor's jaw tightened at this, but he did not look surprised. That matches what our analysts guessed, based on the fleet's movement patterns. It did not look like an exploration mission. It looked like a hunting pattern, moving from system to system, growing larger each time, as though it were gathering strength, or perhaps gathering slaves and supplies along the way. Vatal nodded grimly. That is exactly how the Skarn operate. They rarely send their full strength at once. They send scouting fleets first, testing the defenses of a system, taking what they can, and reporting back before a larger force arrives to finish the job. If what reached your system 8 months ago was truly a scouting fleet, then Earth was fortunate. A true Skarn invasion force would have been far larger and far more difficult to detect before it was too late. "We were not fortunate," Okafor said, his voice hardening slightly. "We were prepared to fight regardless of the size of that fleet, because we did not know if a scouting fleet or the full invasion was coming. We treated the threat as though it were the worst it could possibly be." Vatal studied him for a long moment. There was something remarkable in the calm, stubborn way this human spoke about facing an enemy he still barely understood. She had read about human wars, human conflicts, human courage in old records, but standing here, listening to a tired old man describe how his entire species had turned its full strength toward defending itself in less than a year, she began to understand it differently than any recording could have taught her. "Show me their fleet's departure course," she said. "I want to understand exactly where they are heading, and how far they have already traveled." Okafor brought up a wider star chart, one that stretched far beyond the borders of the human solar system, into a region of space the Concord charts labeled as the outer edge of the verdant belt, a loose cluster of star systems that had never been fully explored by either side. A long, curving line marked the path humanity's fleet had taken since departing 3 weeks earlier. "Our fleet, we call it the First Expeditionary Fleet, left under the command of Fleet Admiral Elena Reyes," Okafor explained. She was chosen because of her experience commanding deep space testing missions before the crisis began, and because she volunteered without hesitation the moment the mission was proposed. The fleet consists of 140 ships, ranging from heavy cruisers to smaller strike craft, along with several experimental vessels our engineers built, using technology we barely finished testing before launch. 140 ships, Dorsk repeated, sounding almost impressed despite himself. "Built in 8 months. Some of them longer than that," Okafor admitted. "We had already begun building a small defense fleet before the crisis, mostly for exploring our own system and testing new engines. When the threat was confirmed, every project on this planet that touched space technology was redirected toward finishing and expanding that fleet as quickly as possible. We are not foolish enough to think our ships match the size or power of species that have been traveling the stars for centuries. But we built what we could, as fast as we could, and we sent it forward, rather than wait to see what would happen if we did nothing." Vital studied the star chart carefully, tracing the path of the human fleet with her eyes. "This course leads directly toward the last known position of the Skarn scouting fleet, before it slowed to gather reinforcements. Your Admiral Reyes intends to strike them before they can grow any stronger." "That is the plan, yes," Okafor said. "Hit them while they are still weak, before more of their kind arrive to reinforce them. It is a desperate strategy, Fleet Marshal. I will not pretend otherwise. But our military leaders agreed that waiting for the enemy to come to us, at full strength, gave us even less chance of survival." Vital fell silent, thinking. She had commanded ships against the Skarn before, in battles fought with the support of established fleets, veteran crews, and decades of shared battle experience across many species. The thought of a young, untested fleet, built in mere months by a single planet, striking out alone against even a Skarn scouting force, filled her with a deep unease. "Admiral," she said finally, "I must ask you plainly. Do you believe your fleet can win this battle alone?" Okafor was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I hope so. I pray so. But I have spent enough years in service to know that hope is not the same as certainty. What I do know is that Admiral Reyes, and every soldier who followed her out into that dark, knew the risks, and chose to go anyway, because the alternative was to sit here and wait to die." Vital turned to Dorsk, and something passed between them without words, an understanding built from years of fighting side by side. She turned back to Okafor. "Then we will not let them go alone any longer," she said. "My fleet is capable of catching up to your expeditionary fleet, if we depart soon, and push our engines hard. I do not know if we can reach them before they meet the enemy, but I intend to try. Will you grant us access to your fleet's tracking data, so that we might follow their exact course?" Okafor's tired eyes brightened slightly, the first real spark of hope Vital had seen in him since they met. "Fleet Marshal, I would grant you far more than that, if it meant even a chance of bringing our people home safely. Let me show you everything we have." Over the following hours, Concord technicians and human engineers worked side by side for the first time in history, sharing data, comparing star charts, and calibrating tracking systems to follow the exact path of the human fleet's departure. It was slow, careful work, made more difficult by the fact that human and Concord technology used very different systems and languages, but both sides pushed through the difficulty with surprising patience. While the technical teams worked, Vital walked with Okafor through the quieter parts of the station, learning more about what had happened on Earth in the months leading up to the fleet's departure. He told her of countries that had been enemies for generations, suddenly working together, sharing weapons designs and manufacturing secrets they would never have shared under normal circumstances. He told her of scientists working without sleep for weeks at a time, of factories converted overnight from building cars and buildings into building starship hulls and weapon systems. He told her of ordinary people, farmers and teachers and shopkeepers, volunteering by the millions for any role that might help, from working in the new shipyards to caring for the families of soldiers who had already shipped out. It was not perfect, Okafor admitted as they walked. There was panic at first. There were arguments about resources, about which nations would build what, about who would command the new fleet. Some people refused to believe the threat was real, even after we showed them the evidence. But in the end, enough of us came together, and that was enough to build what you see now. Vital listened closely, comparing every word to the calm, careful reports the Concord had gathered over years of quiet observation. Those reports had shown a species capable of both great cruelty and great kindness, of both foolish conflict and remarkable cooperation. She had always believed, deep down, that if humanity faced a threat great enough, they would find a way to come together. She had not expected to see the proof of that belief so soon, or on such a staggering scale. "You said your fleet uses experimental technology," she said, as they reached a viewing window looking out over the quiet curve of the Earth below. "What kind of technology exactly?" Okafor's expression grew thoughtful. "Our scientists had been working for years on a new kind of engine, something they hoped might allow faster travel between star systems without the massive fuel requirements of our older designs. It was still years from being ready for real use under normal circumstances. When the crisis began, our engineers were given full authority and unlimited resources to finish the project no matter the risk. They succeeded, though I will admit, the engine still carries certain dangers even our own scientists do not fully understand yet." "Dangerous how?" Vital asked, her interest sharpening. "The engine produces bursts of speed, far greater than anything we had achieved before," Okafor said, "but it also puts tremendous strain on the ships that carry it. Several early test vessels were lost before the design was stabilized enough for use in the fleet. Even now, our engineers tell me the ships using this technology cannot sustain such speeds for long periods without risking serious damage." Vital considered this carefully. A dangerous, barely tested engine, pushed to its limits by a fleet desperate to reach the enemy quickly. It explained how humanity had managed to build a fleet so fast, and it explained, perhaps, how they intended to catch a Skarn scouting force before it could gather reinforcements. It was a bold gamble, built on technology that was not yet fully proven, carried by crews who had trained for only a handful of months before being sent into battle against an ancient and terrible enemy. "Admiral," Vital said quietly, "I will be honest with you. What your people have done here is remarkable. It may also be reckless beyond anything I have witnessed in 300 years of Concord history. I do not say this to insult you. I say it because I fear for what your fleet may find when it reaches the enemy, and I do not wish humanity's courage to become humanity's downfall." Okafor was silent for a long moment, looking out at the quiet blue curve of the planet below them. "Fleet Marshal," he said finally, "I have spent my whole life in service to a planet that spent most of its history fighting itself over things that, looking back, seem almost foolish now. When this threat appeared, I watched my species do something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. I watched us stop fighting each other and start fighting for each other instead. I cannot promise you that our fleet will win this battle, but I can promise you that they did not go out there quietly, and they did not go out there without hope." Vital looked at him for a long moment, then turned back toward the corridor leading to the docking bay, where her shuttle waited to return her to the Silver Accord. "Then let us give them something more than hope, Admiral," she said. "Let us give them help, before it is too late." Within the hour, the Concord fleet had finished copying every scrap of tracking data the station could provide. Vital gave the order, and the fleet turned away from the quiet, empty orbit of Earth, engines building toward full power as they set course to follow the path of humanity's first expeditionary fleet into the dark unknown beyond the verdant belt. Behind them, Earth continued its slow turn, quieter than it had been in generations, holding on to the hope that somewhere out among the stars, its children would find their way home. Before she left the station, Vital made one more request of Admiral Okafor. She asked if any human volunteers would be willing to join the Concorde fleet as guides and translators, to help her officers understand human tactics, human language, and human thinking, as they raced to catch up with the expeditionary fleet. Okafor did not hesitate. He gathered a small team of 6 people from the station's skeleton crew, mostly young officers who had been left behind due to injury or specialized training duties rather than lack of willingness to fight. Among them was a woman named Captain Mara Chen, a sharp-eyed strategist who had helped design several of the tactical simulations used to train the expeditionary fleet before its departure. She had wanted desperately to go with the fleet herself, but a broken arm suffered during a training accident had kept her behind. When Okafor asked for volunteers to join the alien ships, she stepped forward before he had even finished speaking. "I know how Admiral Reyes thinks," she told Vital, once she had been brought aboard the Silver Accord and given a translator device to wear around her wrist. "I helped write half the plans she is using out there right now. If your ships are going to catch up to her fleet, you will need someone who can guess what she might do next, and I am the closest thing you will get to that on short notice." Vital studied the young officer carefully. There was no fear in her eyes, only a fierce, focused determination that reminded Vital strongly of the very qualities she had admired in humanity from the beginning. "Very well, Captain Chen. You will work closely with my strategic officers. I want to understand not just where your fleet is going, but how they are likely to fight once they arrive." As the Concorde fleet pushed deeper into the dark beyond the human system, Mara Chen proved her worth quickly. She explained to Vital's officers the reasoning behind many of the expeditionary fleet's tactics born from a mixture of old human naval history and hard lessons learned from computer simulations run against every scrap of data they had gathered about the approaching Skarn scouts. "Admiral Reyes will not fight a straight head-on battle if she can avoid it," Chen explained, standing before a star map in the Silver Accord's war room, human and Concorde officers listening closely. "Our ships are faster than anything we have ever built before, thanks to the new engines, but our weapons and shields are still far behind what a species like the Skarn likely has. She will try to use speed and surprise instead of raw strength, hit them fast, hit them where they are weak, and pull back before they can bring their full power to bear." Dorsk frowned at this. A hit-and-run strategy against an enemy fleet gathering reinforcements. Risky. If she misjudges the timing even once, her ships could be caught and overwhelmed before they can retreat. "She knows that," Chen said quietly. "Everyone in that fleet knows that. They trained for exactly this scenario for months, running the same drills over and over, until the timing became instinct rather than thought. It is not a perfect plan, Colonel, but it is the best plan a young fleet with limited resources could put together against an enemy this dangerous." Vital listened to this exchange with growing respect, both for the strategy itself and for the calm confidence with which Chen described it. She thought again of Admiral Okafor's words back on the station, about a species that had learned, in the space of only a few months, to set aside old rivalries and work toward a single desperate purpose. It was one thing to hear such things described. It was another to see the proof of it laid out across a star map by a young officer who clearly believed, with her whole heart, in the fleet she had helped design. The days that followed blurred together in a steady rhythm of travel, planning, and careful observation. The Concorde fleet pushed its engines hard, following the tracking data as closely as possible, watching for any sign of the human fleet or the Skarn scouts they were chasing. Along the way, they began to find evidence of the path humanity's ships had taken, small clues scattered across the dark, empty systems they passed through. In one system, sensors picked up faint traces of unusual radiation, the telltale signature of the new human engines burning at full power as the expeditionary fleet raced through on its way toward the enemy. In another, Concorde scouts found the wreckage of a single small human vessel, a scout ship that had apparently suffered engine failure and been left behind, its crew already evacuated by a support vessel according to the emergency logs still recorded in its systems. Vital ordered the wreck studied carefully, and her engineers came away both impressed and unsettled by what they found. "Marshal," her chief engineer reported, "this vessel's engine components are unlike anything in our own designs. Whoever built this ship was working with principles we do not fully recognize. It is crude in places, unfinished in others, clearly built under great time pressure. But the core idea behind it is sound, and in some ways, more advanced than anything the Concorde currently uses for short bursts of speed." Veital considered this news carefully. It matched everything Okafor and Chen had told her. A young fleet built quickly, using bold and untested ideas, pushed forward by desperation and courage, rather than careful, patient development. She found herself both admiring and worrying over this combination in equal measure. Boldness could win battles that caution alone never would. But boldness, unchecked by experience, could also lead brave people into disaster. "How far ahead of us do you estimate the human fleet remains?" she asked Dorsk, as the Silver Accord pushed onward through the dark. Dorsk studied the tracking data closely before answering. "If our calculations are correct, and if they have maintained a steady pace since departing Earth, they are perhaps 4 days ahead of us, at our current speed. Closing that gap further would require pushing our engines beyond safe limits for an extended period, which I would not recommend without good reason." Veital weighed this information carefully, thinking of the Skarn scouting fleet gathering strength somewhere ahead, and of Admiral Reyes leading her people toward a battle she might not be prepared to survive. 4 days, she said quietly. 4 days may be the difference between arriving in time to help and arriving only in time to find out what happened after it was already too late. She turned to Mara Chen, who stood nearby, watching the star map with a tense, focused expression. "Captain Chen, based on everything you know of Admiral Reyes and her fleet's capabilities, how long do you believe it will take them to reach the enemy's gathering point?" Chen studied the numbers for a long moment before answering, her voice quiet but steady. "If she holds to the plan we trained for, she will not rush blindly into contact. She will send scouts ahead first, gather intelligence, and choose her moment carefully before committing the main fleet to battle. That could buy us more time than the raw distance numbers suggest. But it could also mean she is already closer to first contact than we think, if the enemy's numbers or position have changed since our last reliable reports." Veital nodded slowly, turning back to the star map, to the long, curving path stretching out ahead of them into the dark unknown. "Then we push forward as quickly as we safely can," she said. "Dorsk, adjust our course and speed to close that gap as much as possible, without risking the fleet's engines. Bissa, continue monitoring every frequency for any sign of contact between our people and theirs. I want to know the moment anything changes." The bridge crew moved to follow her orders, and the Silver Accord surged forward once more, its engines glowing bright against the endless dark, carrying Fleet Marshal Veital Sen and her Concord fleet ever closer to the edge of a war that had already begun without them, racing against time to reach humanity's fleet before the true battle could be joined. 5 days later, the Concord fleet reached the edge of a quiet, unnamed star system, one of many small yellow suns scattered along the border of the verdant belt. Sensors immediately began picking up signs of activity, faint traces of energy weapons fire, drifting debris, and the unmistakable signature of both human and Skarn engine technology. Veital stood on the bridge of the Silver Accord, her golden eyes fixed on the growing stream of data, her heart heavy with dread over what they might find. "Marshal!" Bissa called out from her station. "We are picking up wreckage. A great deal of it." Both human and Skarn hull fragments scattered across a wide debris field near the system's third planet. "Casualties?" Veital asked, though she already feared the answer. "Unknown at this time," Bissa said. "No active distress signals detected. No signs of surviving vessels from either side in this immediate area." Veital ordered the fleet to slow its approach, moving carefully through the outer edge of the system, while scouts pushed ahead to gather more detailed readings. Mara Chen stood beside her, arms crossed tightly, her face pale, as she studied the growing debris field on the main screen. "This must be where the first contact happened," Chen said quietly. "Admiral Reyes must have caught up to the Skarn scouts here before we could arrive." As the fleet drew closer, the scale of what had happened became clearer. The debris field stretched across a vast region of space, filled with the broken remains of dozens of ships from both sides. Veital's officers worked carefully to catalog what they found, comparing wreckage patterns and weapon signatures to build a picture of the battle that had taken place. "Based on the damage patterns," her chief tactical officer reported, "it appears the human fleet used a hit-and-run strategy, exactly as Captain Chen predicted. Multiple strike groups made fast passes against the Skarn formation, inflicting damage before withdrawing. The Skarn attempted to counter with heavier, slower vessels, but struggled to match the speed of the human ships." Veital studied the wreckage patterns closely. "How many Skarn vessels were destroyed here?" Difficult to determine exactly, given the scattered nature of the debris, the officer replied. But based on hull fragment analysis, we estimate at least 12 to 15 Skarn vessels were destroyed or severely disabled in this engagement. Dorsk let out a low whistle, clearly impressed despite himself. 12 to 15 ships against a fleet that had barely finished training. That is no small accomplishment, even against a mere scouting force. And human losses? Vital asked, bracing herself for the answer. The tactical officer hesitated before responding. We estimate approximately 8 to 10 human vessels were lost in this engagement, Marshal. However, the debris field does not account for the full size of the reported expeditionary fleet. It appears the majority of human ships survived this initial engagement and continued onward, likely pursuing the retreating Skarn forces deeper into the system. Vital felt a small measure of relief mixed with continued worry. 8 to 10 ships lost was a heavy price for a young fleet to pay, but the fact that the majority had survived and continued the pursuit spoke to both the skill of their commanders and the resilience of their crews. She ordered the fleet to continue forward, following the trail of damage and debris deeper into the system, toward wherever the battle had moved next. As they pushed onward, Concord scouts began picking up faint distress signals from a cluster of smaller asteroids near the system's edge. Vital ordered an immediate course change, and within the hour, they discovered a small group of damaged human vessels sheltering among the asteroid field, using the rocky terrain to hide from any pursuing enemy forces while they carried out emergency repairs. The largest of the damaged ships, a heavy cruiser bearing the name Resolute, painted in bold letters along its scarred hull, immediately hailed the approaching Concord fleet, though the transmission was garbled and uncertain, clearly unprepared for contact with an unknown alien force. Unidentified fleet, this is the UES Resolute, a tense voice called out over the channel, translated quickly by BIS's systems. State your identity and intentions immediately, or we will be forced to consider you hostile. Vital quickly stepped forward to respond herself, speaking slowly and clearly. This is Fleet Marshal Vital Sen, of the Concord Fleet. We come in peace, and we come seeking to aid your expeditionary fleet against the Skarn threat. We have already spoken with Admiral Okafor at Earth, and Captain Mara Chen of your own forces stands beside me now, ready to confirm our intentions. A tense silence followed before the voice returned, this time carrying a note of cautious relief. Captain Chen, is that really you? This is Lieutenant Commander Diaz aboard the Resolute. We thought you were still grounded back at Earth. Chen leaned toward the communication system, a small, tired smile crossing her face. It's really me, Diaz. Stand down your weapons and let them approach. These people are here to help us, not hurt us. Believe me, I have spent the last several days confirming that myself. Slowly, cautiously, the Resolute and the other damaged human vessels lowered their weapons and allowed the Concord fleet to approach. Vital ordered medical and engineering teams prepared immediately, ready to offer whatever assistance the wounded human ships required. As shuttles began moving between the fleets, carrying supplies, medical personnel, and careful introductions between two species meeting properly for the first time, under such difficult circumstances, Vital requested to speak directly with whoever remained in command of this scattered group. She was brought aboard the Resolute personally, escorted through corridors marked with scorched damage and hastily repaired hull breaches, evidence of how close this ship had come to destruction. She found Lieutenant Commander Diaz in the ship's command center, a young man with tired eyes and a bandaged arm, directing repair efforts alongside a small remaining crew. Fleet Marshal, Diaz said, straightening as she entered, though exhaustion clearly weighed heavily on him. I owe you my thanks, and an explanation, though I am not entirely sure where to begin. Begin with what happened here, Vital said gently, and with where the rest of your fleet has gone. Diaz nodded, gesturing toward a nearby star map showing the system and the paths several groups of ships had taken since the initial battle. We caught up to the Skarn scouting fleet 6 days ago, exactly where the debris field marks the engagement. Admiral Reyes's plan worked better than we dared hope, at first. Our strike groups hit them hard, using speed and coordinated attacks to take down more of their ships than we expected possible. But the enemy adapted faster than we anticipated. They began concentrating their remaining forces, using their heavier vessels as anchors while smaller, faster ships tried to flank our strike groups. And your losses, Vital said quietly. 9 ships, according to our own analysis of the debris. Diaz's expression tightened with grief. 10, actually. One more we lost during the retreat that our scouts had not yet located. Good ships, good crews. We knew going in that this would not be without cost, but knowing it and living through it are very different things, Fleet Marshal. Veital placed a hand gently on the edge of the command console, an old Ilvanar gesture meant to convey shared sorrow. I understand more than you might think, Commander. I have led fleets against the Skarn before. Every victory against them carries a price, and every loss weighs heavily, no matter how many battles you have already survived. Diaz seemed to relax slightly at this, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. Admiral Reyes made the call to press the advantage rather than retreat fully after the initial engagement. The main fleet, along with most of our remaining strike ships, pushed onward, pursuing the surviving Skarn forces deeper into the system, hoping to prevent them from regrouping with any reinforcements that might be gathering further out. My group was ordered to fall back here, to the asteroid field, to carry out emergency repairs and act as a rally point for any other damaged ships that needed to break away from the main pursuit. Veital studied the star map carefully, tracing the path the main human fleet had apparently taken deeper into the system. How long ago did Admiral Reyes's group depart from this location? 4 days, Diaz said. We have had only limited contact with them since, brief coded transmissions confirming they remain engaged with the enemy, but pulling back and striking repeatedly, rather than committing to a single decisive battle. It is a dangerous strategy, Fleet Marshal. If the Skarn manage to bring in reinforcements before Admiral Reyes can finish this fight, our fleet could find itself badly outnumbered. Veital felt the same cold worry she had carried since first hearing of humanity's bold, desperate strategy. 4 days of continued fighting, deeper into unfamiliar territory, against an enemy that could, at any moment, receive reinforcements capable of overwhelming even the most skilled and daring human tactics. Commander Diaz, she said firmly, my fleet is fully repaired and ready for battle. We will leave sufficient forces here to assist with your repairs and protect this position, but I intend to take the bulk of my strength and push forward immediately to reinforce Admiral Reyes before the situation grows any more dangerous. Can you provide us with the most current data on her fleet's position and heading? Diaz nodded eagerly, already moving to pull together the requested information. Of course, Fleet Marshal. And for what it's worth, on behalf of everyone still breathing on this ship, thank you. We did not know if help was coming. We hoped, but we did not know. Veital offered him a small, respectful nod. You need not thank me yet, Commander. Save your gratitude for when we have all safely returned home. For now, let us focus on ensuring that outcome becomes reality. Within hours, the Concorde fleet had resupplied the damaged human vessels, left a small but capable defense force to protect the asteroid field position, and set course deeper into the system, following the trail of continued battle left behind by Admiral Reyes and her fleet. Veital stood once more on the bridge of the Silver Accord, watching the star map as it updated with the latest data, tracing a path marked by scattered wreckage, brief bursts of weapons fire, and the stubborn, determined advance of a fleet that refused to stop fighting, even as the odds continued to shift against them. Dorsk, she said quietly. How far until we reach them? Dorsk studied the numbers carefully before responding. At our current speed, Marshal, we should reach Admiral Reyes's fleet within 2 days, assuming they continue their current pattern of engagement and do not move significantly further from this projected course. Veital nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the star map, on the long, dangerous path stretching out ahead of them. 2 days. 2 days that could mean the difference between arriving in time to turn the tide of this desperate battle or arriving only in time to witness its final, tragic outcome. Then let us not waste a single moment of it, she said, and the Silver Accord surged forward once more, carrying the Concorde fleet ever closer to the heart of humanity's war. During the 2 days of travel that followed, Veital spent much of her time with Mara Chen and the small group of human volunteers who had joined the Concorde fleet back at Earth. She wanted to understand not just the tactics Admiral Reyes might be using, but the woman herself, the mind behind the bold, dangerous strategy that had already cost so many lives and yet continued to push forward rather than retreat. Tell me about her, Veital said one evening, as she and Chen sat together in a quiet observation room aboard the Silver Accord, watching the streaking lights of hyperspace travel outside the reinforced windows. What kind of person chooses to lead an untested fleet into battle against an enemy no one fully understands? Chen was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. Admiral Reyes lost her younger brother in a shuttle accident many years ago, during one of our early space station construction projects. He was an engineer, working on life support systems. A small mistake, a tiny miscalculation, and the whole section lost pressure before anyone could reach him. She has spent her entire career since then, obsessed with getting things right, with never letting a mistake cost lives if she could help it. And yet she leads a fleet built on rushed experimental technology, Vital observed, into a battle where mistakes could cost far more than a single life. Chen gave a small, sad smile. I think that is exactly why she volunteered Fleet Marshal. She told me once, before we launched, that she could not bear the thought of sending others into danger she was not willing to face herself. She said if this fleet was going to be built on hope and desperate improvisation, then she wanted to be the one making the hard calls, not hiding safely behind a desk while someone else carried that weight. Vital considered this for a long moment, thinking of her own path to command, of the careful, patient training the Concorde provided its officers over decades, before granting them authority over even a single ship, let alone an entire fleet. Admiral Reyes had been given command of humanity's entire hope for survival after only a handful of months of preparation, and yet she had accepted that burden without hesitation, exactly as Vital herself had accepted the burden of this rescue mission when the Concorde Council first proposed it. She sounds like someone I would be honored to call a colleague, Vital said quietly. She would probably say the same about you, once she gets past the shock of aliens showing up to help, Chen replied, a tired smile crossing her face. For what it's worth, Fleet Marshal, I don't think any of us expected help to come at all. We built this fleet believing we might be entirely alone in this fight. Finding out we were wrong has been difficult to fully process, even after everything I've seen since boarding your ship. Difficult how? Vital asked gently. Chen was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. For most of human history, we believed we were alone in the universe, or at least that if anyone else was out there, we would never actually meet them. Then, suddenly, we learn not only that other civilizations exist, but that one of them wants to destroy us, and another wants to help us, all within the same few months. It is a lot to take in, Fleet Marshal. I imagine it will take my entire species a long time to fully understand what has happened this year, assuming we survive long enough to have that luxury. Vital nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind those words better than Chen might have expected. The Concorde itself had once been a collection of separate, struggling species, brought together not by choice, but by the shared threat of enemies like the Skarn, forced to learn cooperation and trust far faster than any of them would have chosen on their own. Perhaps, she thought, humanity's story was not so different from her own people's history, only compressed into a far shorter and more brutal timeline. As the fleet continued its approach, Concorde scouts began picking up increasingly detailed signals of ongoing battle ahead, brief bursts of weapons fire, rapid course changes, and the unmistakable chaos of a running engagement between two determined but unevenly matched forces. Vital ordered her fleet to increase readiness, preparing weapons and shields for immediate combat, the moment they arrived at Admiral Reyes's position. On the final evening before their expected arrival, Dorsk approached Vital privately in her quarters, his expression more serious than usual. Marshal, he said, I have reviewed the latest scout reports carefully. The Skarn forces engaging Admiral Reyes's fleet appear to have grown in size since our last confirmed data. It seems reinforcements have already begun arriving, sooner than we hoped. Vital felt her chest tighten at this news. How much larger, Dorsk? Difficult to say precisely from long-range scans, he admitted. But our best estimates suggest the Skarn force may now number close to double what Admiral Reyes originally engaged. If this estimate is accurate, her fleet may already be facing odds far worse than when this pursuit began. Vital closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself against the weight of this news. She thought of Admiral Reyes, of the grief that had shaped her into a leader who refused to send others into danger she would not face herself. She thought of the 10 ships already lost, of Lieutenant Commander Diaz's tired, grieving eyes back aboard the Resolute, and of the desperate, stubborn courage that had carried humanity this far against odds that had seemed impossible from the very beginning. Then we arrive not a moment too soon, she said finally, opening her eyes and meeting Dorsk's steady gaze. Prepare the fleet for immediate combat upon arrival, Dorsk. I do not intend to waste time with careful, cautious approaches when every moment could mean the difference between reinforcing Admiral Reyes in time or arriving only to recover what remains of her fleet. Dorsk nodded firmly. Understood, Marshal. I will see to it personally. As he left to carry out her orders, Veital remained alone for a long moment, looking out at the streaking lights of hyperspace travel through her quarter's small viewport, thinking of the battle that awaited them, and of the strange, remarkable journey that had brought a fleet of careful, patient aliens racing across the stars to fight alongside a young, desperate species they had known for barely more than a week. Before that final jump, Veital walked the halls of the Silver Accord one last time, passing crew members preparing weapon stations, checking shield generators, and running final diagnostics on engines that had already been pushed hard across many days of travel. She stopped at the small medical bay, where several human volunteers from the Resolute had been temporarily housed, offering quiet words of encouragement to soldiers who watched her with a mixture of awe and cautious hope in their tired eyes. She found Mara Chen in the war room, already reviewing the latest scout data with a focused intensity that reminded Veital once again of Admiral Reyes's description, a mind that refused to let fear slow its work. Chen looked up as she entered, her expression tight with worry, but steady with resolve. The numbers do not look good, Fleet Marshal, Chen said quietly. If the Skarn reinforcements have truly doubled their strength, Admiral Reyes will be forced to choose between a full retreat or a battle she cannot win alone. Knowing her, I do not think she will choose retreat easily, not after coming this far and losing this many people already. Then we must ensure she does not have to make that choice at all, Veital said firmly. Captain Chen, I would ask you to remain here, on the bridge, close to our communication systems. The moment we reach visual range of the battle, I will need your understanding of human formations and tactics to help coordinate our approach alongside Admiral Reyes's fleet as smoothly as possible. Chen nodded firmly, though Veital could see the tension in her shoulders, the barely restrained fear for people she clearly considered close friends and colleagues, perhaps closer than that. I'll be ready, Fleet Marshal. Just get us there in time. We will, Veital said, with more confidence than she entirely felt inside. I promise you that, Captain Chen, we will. Returning to the bridge, Veital took her position at the center of the command deck, watching as the final countdown to their hyperspace exit ticked steadily downward on the main display. Dorsk stood beside her, weapon systems fully charged, shields raised to maximum strength, every ship in the Concorde fleet arranged in a tight, disciplined formation, ready to strike the moment they arrived. All ships report ready for combat, Marshal, Dorsk said, his voice steady despite the tension clearly written across his broad features. Veital drew a slow breath, thinking one final time of Earth's quiet, empty orbit, of Admiral Okafor's tired, hopeful eyes, and of the long, difficult path that had brought her fleet racing across the stars to this single, critical moment. Then let us not keep them waiting any longer, she said. Bring us out of hyperspace, and prepare to engage the enemy the instant we arrive. The countdown reached 0, and the Silver Accord, along with the full strength of the Concorde fleet behind it, tore free from hyperspace into the middle of a battle, already burning fiercely across the dark expanse of space before them. The moment the Concorde fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the full scale of the battle became clear across every screen on the Silver Accord's bridge. Space before them burned with weapons fire, bright streaks of energy crossing between two very different fleets, locked in a desperate, deadly dance. The human ships, sleek and fast, darted between slower, heavier Skarn vessels, striking quick blows before pulling away, exactly as Mara Chen had predicted. But the Skarn had indeed grown in number, their formation now stretching wide across the battlefield, surrounding the smaller human fleet on multiple sides. Marshal, Bissa called out urgently, I am picking up heavy damage across multiple human vessels. At least 6 ships appear critically disabled, drifting without power. The flagship, identified as the UES Vanguard, is taking sustained fire from 3 Skarn cruisers simultaneously. Veital's eyes fixed on the tactical display, quickly identifying the Vanguard's position near the center of the chaotic battle, surrounded by enemy ships closing in from multiple directions. "That is Admiral Reyes's flagship," she said. "Dorsk, target those 3 cruisers immediately. Full weapons fire. Concentrate everything we have on breaking that formation before they can finish her off." "Yes, Marshal," Dorsk barked, already relaying orders across the fleet's communication network. The Silver Accord surged forward, along with a dozen other Concord warships, weapon systems blazing to life as they closed the distance toward the besieged human flagship. The Concord's arrival came as a sudden, devastating surprise to the Skarn commanders, who had clearly not anticipated any outside interference in what they likely believed was a straightforward, if stubborn, conquest. Bright beams of concentrated energy tore into the 3 cruisers surrounding the Vanguard, Concord weapons technology far more refined than anything the young human fleet could yet produce. Within moments, one Skarn cruiser broke apart entirely under the sustained assault, while the other 2 peeled away, their shields overwhelmed and failing under the unexpected onslaught. Across the wider battlefield, Skarn formations began to waver, uncertain how to respond to this sudden, powerful new threat entering the fight. Vatal watched carefully as her fleet spread out, engaging enemy vessels across multiple fronts, working to relieve pressure on the scattered, battered human ships, still fighting desperately to hold their ground. "Bissa, open a channel to the Vanguard immediately," Vatal ordered. "I need to speak with Admiral Reyes." It took several tense moments before the connection finally went through, the image resolving to show a woman standing on a heavily damaged bridge, sparks flying from a ruptured console behind her, her uniform torn, and her face marked with soot and exhaustion, yet her eyes remained sharp and fiercely determined despite everything around her. "This is Admiral Elena Reyes," she said, her voice steady, despite the chaos surrounding her. "Whoever you are, you have my gratitude for the timing, but I need to know exactly who I am speaking with, and what your intentions are, before I can trust you with the lives still under my command." "Admiral Reyes, I am Fleet Marshal Vatal Sen, of the Concord Fleet," Vatal replied quickly. "We spoke with Admiral Okafor at Earth, and Captain Mara Chen stands with us now, ready to confirm everything I am about to tell you. We came to warn Earth of the Skarn threat, only to find your fleet had already departed to meet it head-on. We have followed your path ever since, and we are here now to fight alongside you, not against you." Reyes's expression shifted rapidly through disbelief, cautious hope, and finally firm resolve, the transformation of someone accustomed to processing shocking information quickly and moving forward without hesitation. "Mara is with you?" "I am here, Admiral," Chen's voice cut in from beside Vatal, urgency clear in her tone. "It's really them. They're really here to help. Trust the Fleet Marshal, please. We don't have time for anything else right now." Reyes gave a short, sharp nod, some of the tension in her shoulders easing slightly, though the battle raging around her demanded her continued full attention. "All right. Fleet Marshal Sen, my fleet is scattered and badly damaged. I have 6 ships completely disabled, drifting in the middle of this engagement, and the rest of us are barely holding formation against an enemy force that keeps growing larger by the hour. What can your fleet offer in terms of firepower and coordination?" "We brought 40 warships, Admiral," Vatal replied. "Superior weapons and shielding, compared to your current vessels, though I understand your ships carry speed advantages ours cannot match. I propose we use that combination together. Allow my heavier ships to engage the Skarn directly, drawing their fire and breaking their formation, while your faster vessels continue striking at weak points and covering the evacuation of your disabled ships." Reyes considered this for only a brief moment before nodding firmly. "Agreed. I'll pull my strike groups back to cover your heavier ship's flanks and handle evacuation efforts. Fleet Marshal, I owe you and your people more than I can properly express right now, but that conversation will have to wait until we've actually survived this fight." "Agreed, Admiral," Vatal said, allowing herself a small, grim smile. "Let us ensure we both live long enough to have it." The 2 fleets began coordinating rapidly, human and Concord ships adjusting formations and communication protocols on the fly, working together with a speed and efficiency that surprised officers on both sides. Vatal watched with growing admiration as human strike groups darted through the battlefield with remarkable precision, striking Skarn weak points identified through shared sensor data, then pulling back swiftly before the enemy could retaliate effectively. The tide of battle began to shift dramatically, With Concord heavy warships absorbing and returning fire far more effectively than the enemy had anticipated, the Skarn formation, already stretched thin trying to surround the original human fleet, found itself increasingly overwhelmed. Ship after ship fell under the combined assault, explosions blooming silently across the dark expanse of space, as Skarn cruisers broke apart under sustained fire from two very different, yet remarkably complementary fighting styles. Still, the Skarn did not retreat easily. Their commanders, recognizing the shifting tide, began concentrating their remaining forces into a tighter, more desperate formation, attempting to break through toward the Concord fleet's flagship, in what appeared to be a final, aggressive gambit. Vatal watched as a large cluster of Skarn vessels turned sharply, engines burning bright, as they charged directly toward the Silver Accord's position. "Marshal, incoming attack run. At least 15 enemy vessels converging on our position," Dorsk reported urgently. Before Vatal could issue new orders, a burst of static crackled across the comm system, followed by Admiral Reyes's voice, tight with focused determination. "Fleet Marshal, my strike groups are moving to intercept. Hold your position, and keep your shields concentrated forward. We'll take their flanks." Vatal watched as human strike ships, small and fast, swept in from multiple angles, weapons blazing as they tore into the charging Skarn formation from the sides, breaking their tight formation and forcing several vessels to peel away, to defend against the sudden flanking assault. The maneuver worked exactly as Reyes had promised, buying crucial time for the Silver Accord's shields to hold steady against the reduced weight of the remaining direct assault. "Return fire, full spread," Vatal ordered, and the Silver Accord's powerful weapon systems lit up the darkness, tearing through the remaining Skarn vessels attempting to press the attack. One by one, the enemy ships fell, their hulls breaking apart under the combined pressure of Concord firepower and continued harassment from Reyes's fast, agile strike groups. Within another hour of fierce, coordinated fighting, the battle's outcome became increasingly clear. The Skarn formation, having lost the majority of its remaining strength, began a hasty, disorganized retreat, surviving vessels scattering in different directions as they attempted to escape the combined might of the human and Concord fleets, now working seamlessly together. "Marshal, enemy forces are retreating across multiple vectors," Bissa reported, relief clear in her voice. "Should we pursue?" Vatal considered this carefully, weighing the desire to press their advantage against the exhausted, damaged state of both fleets after such a long and difficult engagement. "No," she said finally. "Let them go. Our priority now is recovering the disabled human vessels and treating the wounded. We have won this battle, but I do not wish to risk further losses chasing a broken enemy through unfamiliar space." Across the battlefield, both fleets began the careful, urgent work of recovery. Concord and human medical teams, coordinating for the first time to reach disabled ships and wounded crews scattered throughout the debris field. Vatal ordered every available shuttle deployed to assist, watching with quiet satisfaction as human and alien crews worked side by side, pulling survivors from damaged hulls and offering what comfort and aid they could to those who had fought so hard and so bravely. Admiral Reyes, once the immediate crisis had passed and her own flagship's most critical repairs were underway, requested to be transported personally to the Silver Accord to meet Fleet Marshal Vatal Sen face to face. Vatal welcomed her aboard personally, meeting her at the docking bay, alongside Dorsk and a visibly emotional Mara Chen, who embraced the tired, battle-worn admiral the moment she stepped through the airlock. "Mara," Reyes said, returning the embrace briefly, before stepping back, her sharp eyes turning to study Vatal with open curiosity and evident gratitude. "Fleet Marshal Senard, I don't have adequate words for what your fleet did here today. You saved thousands of lives, mine included. You do not owe me thanks for doing what was right, Admiral Reyes," Vatal replied, offering a respectful bow in the manner she had learned was appropriate among human military traditions. "Your fleet's courage and skill made this victory possible as much as our support did. I have led warships against the Skarn for many years, and I have rarely seen a young, untested force fight with such determination and cleverness as your people showed today." Reyes's tired face showed a flicker of pride beneath the exhaustion. "We did what we had to do, Fleet Marshal, though I will admit, having your fleet arrive when it did feels like more than luck. It feels like something we will be talking about in our history books for a very long time to come." Vatal considered this for a moment, thinking of Earth's quiet, empty orbit, of Admiral Okafor's tired hope, and of the long, difficult path that had led her fleet here, to this moment, standing beside a human commander, who had risked everything for her people's survival. Perhaps it is the beginning of a new history for both our peoples, Admiral. One I hope will be written with far more cooperation than conflict, from this day forward. Reyes extended her hand, a human gesture Vatal had studied carefully during her years observing Earth, and Vatal accepted it firmly, sealing a moment that neither of them fully understood yet, would change the future of both their civilizations forever. "Let's go make sure that history gets written then," Reyes said, a tired but genuine smile finally crossing her exhausted features. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us, Fleet Marshal, starting with getting everyone home safely." Behind them, across the battle-scarred expanse of space, human and Concord ships continued their careful work of recovery and repair, two very different fleets bound together now by shared sacrifice and hard-won victory, beginning the long, uncertain journey back toward a future neither species could have imagined, only a few short months before. That evening, as repair crews continued their work across both fleets, Vatal invited Admiral Reyes and her senior officers to a meeting aboard the Silver Accord, along with Dorsk, Mara Chen, and several of her own Concord commanders. The mood in the room was a strange mixture of relief and lingering tension, victory tempered by the knowledge of losses suffered and questions still unanswered about what might come next. "Before we celebrate too much," Reyes said, standing before the star map with a fresh uniform and a bandage now covering a cut along her temple, "I think we need to discuss what this battle actually means. We destroyed a significant portion of the enemy force, but Fleet Marshal Sen has already told me these Skarn rarely commit their full strength on a first encounter. What we fought today may have only been a fraction of what could eventually come for Earth." Vatal nodded gravely, stepping forward to address the gathered officers. "Admiral Reyes speaks the truth. In my experience fighting the Skarn, a defeat of this scale will not go unanswered. They value conquest highly, and a loss like the one they suffered here today will likely be reported back to their higher command structures. It is possible, even likely, that a larger force will eventually be dispatched, either to avenge this defeat or to finish what this scouting fleet failed to accomplish." A heavy silence fell over the room at this news. Several human officers exchanged worried glances, the weight of the victory they had just achieved suddenly feeling less permanent than they had hoped. "How long do we have, Fleet Marshal?" asked one of Reyes's officers, a stern-faced woman named Colonel Whitfield, who had commanded one of the human strike groups during the battle. "Before a larger force might arrive?" Vatal considered the question carefully. "It is difficult to say with certainty. Skarn command structures are not swift to act, particularly across the vast distances involved in gathering and dispatching a larger invasion fleet. My best estimate, based on previous encounters, would suggest anywhere from several months to a few years before Earth might face a truly significant threat, assuming the Skarn choose to respond at all, rather than seeking easier targets elsewhere." "That is not exactly comforting," Whitfield said dryly, though there was no real anger in her tone, only tired acknowledgement of the difficult reality they now faced. "No," Vatal agreed, "but it is honest, and it gives us something valuable that we did not have 8 months ago, Colonel. Time to prepare properly, rather than rushing forward under the desperate pressure of an immediate, unknown threat." Reyes looked toward Vatal with renewed interest. "What are you suggesting, Fleet Marshal?" "I am suggesting an alliance, Admiral," Vatal said plainly. "A formal partnership between Earth and the Concord, one that would allow your people access to our knowledge, our technology where appropriate, and our support in preparing proper defenses, while also allowing the Concord to benefit from humanity's clear ingenuity, courage, and the remarkable pace at which your people can adapt and innovate when faced with necessity. I cannot promise the Concord Council will agree easily. There will be those who argue Earth is too young, too unpredictable to trust with such closeness. But after what I have witnessed these past weeks, I intend to argue strongly in favor of exactly this kind of partnership." Reyes was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer with the same careful, focused intensity she had shown throughout the battle. "Fleet Marshal, 8 months ago, my people did not know we were not alone in this universe. We built an entire fleet in desperate secrecy, uncertain if help would ever come, uncertain if we stood any real chance at all. If you are offering us the chance to stand beside allies, rather than facing threats like the Skarn, entirely alone in the future, I would be a fool not to bring that offer back to Earth's leadership with my strongest possible recommendation." Veital allowed herself a small, genuine smile, the first she had felt fully at ease sharing, since this long, uncertain mission had begun. "Then let us begin building that future together, Admiral Reyes, starting with the difficult, practical work of getting both our fleets safely home." The meeting continued late into the evening, officers from both fleets working together to plan the logistics of the journey back toward human space, coordinating repair schedules, resource sharing, and the careful process of towing severely damaged vessels that could not travel under their own power. It was slow, exhausting work, made more complicated by the differences between human and Concord technology, but it proceeded with a spirit of cooperation that surprised even Veital, who had spent years studying how difficult first alliances between different species could often prove to be. Later that night, unable to sleep despite her own exhaustion, Veital found herself once again standing before the observation window in her quarters, looking out at the quiet, star-filled darkness beyond the ship's hull. The battle was over, the immediate crisis had passed. But she knew, as she watched the distant stars, that this was only the beginning of a much longer and more complicated story, one that would require patience, trust, and continued courage from both her own people and the remarkable stubborn humans she had come to admire so deeply over these past difficult weeks. A soft chime announced a visitor at her door, and she turned to find Mara Chen standing in the corridor, still wearing her Concord-issued uniform modifications, looking tired but far more at peace than Veital had seen her since they first met back on Earth's quiet, empty station. "I wanted to thank you properly, Fleet Marshal," Chen said quietly, stepping into the room at Veital's gesture of invitation. "Not just for the battle, though obviously that too, but for listening, for actually taking the time to understand us, rather than just deciding what was best for us without asking." Veital studied the young officer for a long moment, thinking of everything she had learned over these past weeks, lessons that no amount of careful, distant observation could ever have taught her nearly as well as walking this difficult path alongside humanity itself. "Captain Chen," she said finally, "I came to Earth, believing I understood your people well enough to protect you, as one might protect a child, too young to understand the dangers of the wider universe. I have learned, quite thoroughly, how wrong that assumption truly was. Humanity does not need protecting so much as it needs allies willing to stand beside you, and I am grateful, more than I can properly express, that circumstances allowed me to become one of those allies." Chen smiled, a genuine warm expression that reminded Veital once again of the remarkable resilience and spirit she had come to associate so strongly with humanity during this long, difficult journey. "For what it's worth, Fleet Marshal, I think Earth is going to be very glad you showed up when you did, even if you did arrive a little too late to stop us from doing something completely reckless first." Veital laughed softly, a rare and genuine sound that surprised even herself. "Perhaps, Captain Chen, being a little too late was exactly what allowed me to see who humanity truly is, rather than who I assumed you might be. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from arriving just after the moment you expected, rather than exactly on time." Outside the window, the stars continued their silent, endless watch over two fleets working together through the night, preparing for the long journey home, and for whatever challenges still lay ahead in the uncertain but hopeful future now stretching out before both their peoples. The journey back to Earth took nearly 3 weeks, far slower than the desperate race that had carried the Concord fleet outward, but this time, there was no need for haste, only the careful, steady work of bringing damaged ships and weary crews safely home. Along the way, something remarkable began to happen between the human and Concord fleets, something that Veital had not fully expected, despite everything she had already witnessed during the battle and its aftermath. The two fleets did not simply travel together. They began to truly work together. Human engineers, endlessly curious despite their exhaustion, spent hours studying Concord repair techniques, eagerly absorbing new methods for hull reinforcement and shield calibration. Concord technicians, in turn, found themselves fascinated by the clever, resourceful shortcuts human crews had developed under the pressure of their rushed shipbuilding program, solutions born from necessity that sometimes achieved results through entirely different approaches than the Concord's own careful, established methods. Veital spent much of the journey moving between ships, visiting both her own vessels and the human fleet, continuing to build the foundation of understanding and trust that she hoped would support a lasting alliance between their two peoples. She spoke often with Admiral Reyes, the two commanders comparing notes on leadership, on the weight of difficult decisions, and on the particular loneliness that came with holding responsibility for so many lives. "I keep thinking about the 10 ships we lost in that first engagement," Reyes admitted one evening, as she and Veital shared a quiet meal aboard the Silver Accord, human food carefully prepared by Concord Kitchens that had worked hard to accommodate their new allies' different dietary needs. "I know it could have been so much worse. I know that, statistically, given what we were facing, it is practically a miracle we did not lose the entire fleet. But it does not make it hurt any less, knowing those were people who trusted me with their lives, and I could not bring all of them home." Veital listened carefully, recognizing in Reyes's words an echo of feelings she herself had carried through many years of Concord service. "I have led fleets into battle many times, Admiral Reyes, against threats far better understood than the one you faced with so little preparation. I have lost ships, lost crews, lost friends I had served alongside for decades. That weight never fully disappears. I do not believe it should. It is what keeps commanders like us careful, thoughtful, unwilling to spend lives carelessly, even when hard choices must still be made." Reyes nodded slowly, seeming to find some measure of comfort in these words, spoken by someone who clearly understood the particular burden of command from long, hard experience rather than simple sympathy. "How do the Concord Council typically handle situations like this? Bringing a new species into your alliance, I mean. What happens once we actually reach Earth?" Veital considered the question carefully before answering. "The process will not be simple, Admiral Reyes. I must report back to the Council with a full account of everything that has happened here, and I fully expect significant debate before any formal alliance is approved. There will be members of the Council who argue that humanity remains too unpredictable, too young in your development, to be trusted with full Concord membership so quickly. Others will point to what your people accomplished in these past months as clear evidence that Earth deserves far more respect and consideration than such caution would suggest." "And which side do you fall on, Fleet Marshal?" Reyes asked, her sharp eyes studying Veital closely. Veital met her gaze steadily. "I have seen your people build an entire war fleet from nothing in 8 months, using rushed and imperfect technology, driven forward by nothing but courage and desperate necessity. I have watched your soldiers fight with skill and cleverness against an enemy far more experienced and better equipped than they were. I have seen your engineers adapt Concord technology within days of first exposure to it, finding creative solutions my own people had not considered in centuries of careful, patient development. I do not believe humanity is too young for this alliance, Admiral Reyes. I believe humanity may be exactly what the Concord needs, a partner capable of finding bold, unconventional solutions to problems that have troubled slower, more cautious minds for far too long." Reyes seemed genuinely moved by this assessment, though she quickly covered the emotion with a small, tired smile. "That is quite the recommendation, Fleet Marshal. I hope your council listens as closely to you as I have learned to over these past weeks." "As do I," Veital replied honestly. "But whatever the council ultimately decides, I do not believe this alliance between our two peoples truly depends on their formal approval alone. What has grown between our crews these past weeks, the trust, the cooperation, the shared sacrifice, that cannot simply be undone by careful, distant politics. I believe that bond will continue to grow, regardless of what titles or treaties the Council eventually attaches to it." As the combined fleet finally approached Earth's solar system 3 weeks later, word of their victory and their journey had already spread quickly through careful, coded transmissions sent ahead to Earth's remaining leadership. When the fleet finally entered Earth's orbit, they found a very different welcome than the quiet, empty silence that had greeted Veital's first arrival so many weeks before. Every available communication channel across the planet buzzed with activity. Footage of the approaching fleet broadcast to billions of people who had spent months living with the terrifying uncertainty of whether their loved ones, their soldiers, their entire fleet, would ever return home at all. Veital watched from the Silver Accord's bridge as thousands of smaller vessels, civilian ships, media drones, and official escort craft rose up from Earth's surface to greet the returning fleet. A chaotic but joyful welcome unlike anything the careful, orderly Concorde had ever experienced during a first contact mission. Admiral Okafor himself greeted them personally once the fleet settled into orbit, his tired face now transformed by open, unguarded relief and pride as he welcomed both Admiral Reyes and Fleet Marshal Vital Sen back to the station that had witnessed the beginning of this remarkable journey. "You did it," Okafor said, embracing Reyes warmly, before turning to offer Vital a deep, respectful bow. He had clearly practiced carefully in preparation for this moment. "Fleet Marshal Sen, on behalf of every person on this planet, thank you. You did not have to come. You did not have to risk your fleet, your people, for a species you had known for such a short time. But you did, and because of that choice, Earth still stands today." Vital returned the bow with equal respect. "Admiral Okafor, it was never truly a difficult choice, not once I understood the courage and determination your people carried with them into that battle. I came to Earth expecting to protect a young, vulnerable species from a danger they could not yet understand. I found instead a species already fighting fiercely for its own survival, needing not protection so much as partnership. That is a lesson I will carry with me for the rest of my life, and one I intend to share carefully with my own people back home." In the days immediately following their return, before formal negotiations even began, Vital insisted on visiting Earth's surface personally, something the Concorde Council had originally advised against during the earliest stages of planning this mission, back when careful, cautious observation from orbit had still seemed like the wisest approach. But after everything she had witnessed, Vital no longer felt inclined toward such distant caution. Admiral Okafor arranged for her to visit one of the coastal cities where much of the fleet's shipbuilding effort had taken place, a place that had transformed almost overnight from a quiet fishing town into one of the largest automated shipyards on the planet. Standing on a hillside overlooking the harbor, Vital watched as massive cranes and robotic assembly lines continued their tireless work, even now that the immediate crisis had passed, building new ships, not for desperate war, but for exploration, trade, and the steady growth of a partnership just beginning to take shape. A small crowd had gathered nearby, kept at a respectful distance by Earth security personnel, watching the tall, pale alien with open curiosity rather than fear. Children stood at the front of the group, staring up at Vital with wide, fascinated eyes, whispering excitedly to one another, in a way that reminded her strongly of old recordings she had studied of human classrooms, full of endless questions and boundless curiosity about the world around them. One small girl, braver than the rest, stepped forward hesitantly, clutching her mother's hand loosely, as she looked up at Vital. "Are you really from another planet?" she asked, her voice carrying the particular fearless directness that Vital had come to associate specifically with young humans. Vital knelt down carefully, bringing herself closer to the child's height, mindful of how large and strange she likely appeared. "I am," she said gently. "My home is very far away, further than your fastest ships could travel in many, many years without the help of technology, like the kind now being built in this very shipyard." The girl considered this information with the serious concentration only a child could bring to such an enormous concept. "Did you come to help us fight the bad aliens?" "I came to help however I could," Vital answered honestly, "though I quickly learned that your people were already fighting bravely long before I arrived. I am simply grateful I arrived in time to stand beside you, rather than only in time to hear the story afterward." The girl's mother, watching this exchange with cautious but growing warmth, finally spoke up herself. "My husband served on one of the strike ships," she said quietly. "He came home 3 weeks ago, exhausted, quieter than before, but alive. I don't have words to properly thank whoever helped bring him back to us." Vital rose slowly, meeting the woman's eyes with the same respectful sincerity she had shown throughout her long mission. "You need not thank me alone. Thank the courage your husband carried with him when he volunteered to fight for a future he was not certain would ever come. That courage is what ultimately made everything else, including my fleet's arrival, actually matter." Moments like these repeated themselves throughout Vital's visits across Earth's surface in the weeks that followed. Quiet conversations with shipyard workers, soldiers, scientists, and ordinary families who had lived through months of uncertainty and fear, only to emerge on the other side with a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Vital found herself deeply moved by these encounters, far more than any of her careful, distant study of Earth had ever prepared her to expect. Reports and recordings, she realized, could never fully capture the particular resilience and warmth she found in these direct, personal moments among the people she had traveled so far to help protect. She also spent considerable time working alongside Mara Chen and several of Reyes's other officers, helping design the framework for what would eventually become the foundation of ongoing cooperation between Earth and the Concord. Joint training programs were proposed, allowing human officers to study alongside experienced Concord commanders, while Concord engineers would work directly with Earth's shipyards to help refine and stabilize the dangerous new engine technology that had carried the expeditionary fleet into battle in the first place. "We nearly lost several ships during testing because of that engine," Chen admitted to Vital one afternoon, as they reviewed technical schematics together aboard the Silver Accord. "If your engineers can help us make it safer without losing the speed advantage, it would mean everything for our future fleet designs." "My engineers have already expressed great interest in studying your approach," Vital replied. "There is a boldness in your engineering philosophy that Concord scientists have not embraced in many generations, perhaps because we have rarely faced the kind of desperate urgency that drove your people to take such risks. I believe combining your willingness to innovate quickly with our more patient, careful refinement process could produce remarkable results for both our peoples." Chen smiled at this, clearly pleased by the thought of continued collaboration rather than simply receiving assistance from a more advanced ally. "I like that idea, Fleet Marshal. Not just Earth learning from the Concord, but both of us actually learning from each other. That is precisely the kind of partnership I hope to build," Vital said firmly. "Not one where the older, more experienced species simply dictates to the younger, but one where both sides bring genuine value, genuine wisdom, to a shared future." Formal negotiations began between Earth's leadership and the Concord Council shortly after, conducted carefully and patiently across the vast distance separating human space from the Concord's central worlds. Vital remained at Earth throughout much of this process, serving as an important bridge between the two civilizations, helping translate not just language, but culture, custom, and careful diplomatic nuance between two peoples still learning how to understand one another properly. The debates within the Concord Council proved every bit as difficult as Vital had predicted. Some members argued strongly against granting humanity full alliance status so quickly, pointing to Earth's continued history of internal conflict and its clear lack of experience navigating the wider complexities of galactic politics. But Vital, joined by several officers who had witnessed the battle firsthand, argued passionately and persistently in favor of the partnership, presenting detailed accounts of humanity's courage, ingenuity, and remarkable capacity for rapid cooperation when faced with genuine necessity. During one particularly tense session of the negotiations, relayed to Vital through careful reports from Concord representatives on the council, a senior member named Councillor Threx, of the cautious and methodical Braxil species, raised strong objections to the pace of the proposed alliance. He argued that granting humanity such close cooperation so soon after first contact ignored centuries of Concord tradition built specifically to prevent hasty decisions that might later prove dangerous or unwise. Vital, invited to address the council directly through a long-range communication link, stood before the assembled representatives of a dozen different species and spoke plainly of everything she had witnessed. She described the empty, quiet station where she first learned humanity had already chosen to fight rather than wait. She described the wreckage fields, the desperate courage of pilots barely out of training, and the quiet, grieving strength of commanders, like Admiral Reyes, who bore the weight of every loss personally, rather than hiding behind rank or distance. Councillor Threx speaks of tradition, Vital said, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber, and I do not dismiss the wisdom behind that caution lightly. But I ask the Council to consider this. Humanity did not wait for our tradition, our careful process, our centuries of patient observation, before acting to save themselves. They looked at an impossible threat and chose to meet it head-on, with nothing but their own courage and ingenuity to guide them. I do not believe such a species requires more centuries of careful watching before we recognize what they have already proven beyond doubt. I believe they have earned our trust through action, which speaks far louder than any amount of patient study ever could. The chamber fell silent for a long moment, before Councillor Threx, though clearly still troubled by the pace of events, offered a slow, measured nod. Your argument carries weight, Fleet Marshal Sen, even if it challenges much of what our tradition holds dear. Perhaps it is time the Concord learned to recognize courage, as clearly as we recognize careful patience. That single exchange, later recounted to Vatal by colleagues who had witnessed it directly, marked a turning point in the negotiations. Support for the alliance grew steadily in the weeks that followed, and eventually, after months of careful negotiation, a formal alliance was established between Earth and the Concord, not full membership immediately, but a strong, respected partnership that granted humanity access to Concord knowledge and support, while allowing Earth to maintain its independence and continue developing at its own remarkable pace. Admiral Reyes was appointed as Earth's primary liaison to the growing alliance, while Mara Chen, now formally promoted, began working closely with Concord strategists to help develop long-term defense plans that combined the best of both human ingenuity and Concord experience. On the day the alliance was formally signed, a ceremony held aboard a newly constructed space station orbiting Earth, built jointly by both human and Concord engineers, as a symbol of their partnership. Vatal stood beside Admiral Okafor, Admiral Reyes, and Captain Chen, watching as representatives from both civilizations finalized the agreement that would shape the future of human and Concord relations for generations to come. "It is strange," Vatal said quietly, watching the ceremony unfold before them, "to think that if my fleet had arrived only a few weeks earlier, before your people had already launched their own desperate mission, this alliance might have formed very differently. Perhaps Earth would have simply accepted Concord protection, rather than proving through your own courage and sacrifice that you deserve to stand beside us as equals." Reyes considered this thoughtfully. "Maybe you're right, Fleet Marshal. Maybe arriving too late, in a strange way, ended up being exactly what both our peoples needed. We got to prove ourselves, on our own terms, before help arrived, and you got to see who we really are, rather than who you assumed we might need to become." Okafor, listening nearby, offered a small, knowing smile. "Sometimes the best beginnings come from the most unexpected paths, Admiral. I do not think any of us, alien or human, could have planned this story the way it actually unfolded, and yet here we stand, allies bound not just by treaty, but by shared battle, shared loss, and shared hope for whatever comes next." As the ceremony concluded and the assembled representatives began to disperse, Vatal found herself once more standing before a viewing window, looking out at Earth's quiet blue curve below, no longer empty and silent as it had been on that first strange arrival, but alive once more, with the busy, hopeful activity of a species that had faced near destruction and emerged stronger, wiser, and now, for the first time, truly connected to the wider galaxy beyond its own sky. She thought of the long journey that had brought her here, the desperate race across the stars, the quiet, empty station, where she had first learned that humanity had already chosen to fight, rather than wait to be saved, and the fierce, determined courage she had witnessed in every human she had come to know throughout this remarkable mission. The Concord had come to Earth expecting to find a young, vulnerable species in need of protection. Instead, they had found true allies, ready to stand and fight for their future, needing only the chance to prove it. The Galactic Fleet had arrived at Earth too late to prevent humanity's war, but in arriving when they did, Fleet Marshal Vatal Sen realized they had arrived at exactly the right moment to witness something far more important than a rescue. They had arrived in time to become part of humanity's story, not as saviors swooping in to protect the helpless, but as partners, standing shoulder to shoulder with a species that had already proven, beyond any doubt, that it belonged among the stars. And as new alliances formed and old fears began to fade, both humanity and the Concord turned their eyes toward the future together, ready to face whatever challenges the wider galaxy might still hold, no longer as strangers meeting for the first time, but as true allies, forged together in the fires of a war that had brought them closer than either side could ever have imagined.